Well, I do love my coffee, and to be honest, I have a hard time starting my day without it. I think Dunkin' Donuts slogan has it right. America runs on Dunkin'. But the truth is, I think we're running on something else today. We're running on fear. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of missing out. And sometimes just that fear that I'm not enough. And we're carrying that weight around. And we're seeing it play out in our corporations. And it becomes emotional fuel. And we become addicted to the very thing that is actually hurting us. And I'll tell you an interesting story. My adult son became a EMT, a volunteer EMT, asked me if I'd help out. And I became a volunteer EMT in addition to my corporate job. And fast forward, we go out 2 a.m. on this call, and it's a terrible scene plays out. It's a beautiful family. They're all gathered around their father, and he's barely able to breathe, and they're all just crying in the room. And very quickly we realize this is a chronic smoker. This is somebody who smoked their whole life. And what happens is their body becomes addicted to carbon dioxide instead of oxygen. The very thing they're craving is killing them. It's a terrible scene to play out, but I thought, wow, this is a lot what plays out in America, in corporate America. And I'm not just saying corporate, it could be organizations in our homes and our communities. The very thing that is killing us, this fear, this isolation, is hurting us. The Surgeon General has actually written a report on it called the Report on Isolation and Loneliness. And they talk specifically about the impact of that on our health. And it says it's equivalent to smoking 16 cigarettes a day, just like that COPD patient we just talked about. But you say, oh, what does this have to do with my business? Well, the truth is, in that same report, they said that same stress and isolation attributes to about $150 billion of workplace absenteeism in the United States every year. And it's not just the United States problem, it's around the world. But think about that. That stress that we're addicted to is actually killing us, is costing us our health and our finances. And I'll tell you, but let's back up. The very first book I've ever written on self-improvement, if you've read it, it was a great book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence Others. Fantastic book, and if you haven't picked it up, I suggest it. But they talk about those type of things that are really relevant, the things that are helpful in a building relationship. And it's built on trust and integrity and connection, having been able to see each other as they really are. And we call it empathy. There's a lot of other words that we like to talk about. At the end of the day, it's love. It's love and it's connection, and it's putting that oxygen back into the room. And share another story of how I saw this play out myself. Years ago, not too long ago, actually, I took over a failing office on Wall Street. It was a M&A that was supposed to happen. They didn't go through, and they kept people and the organization, and people are in the wrong seats. And if you've ever been through that, there's a lot of stress that plays out after that. Well, I walked in the door that day, the first day, I remember you could feel the stress in the air, almost touch it. And people walked around and they were angry and hostile. So I took notes. And the very next day I brought up everybody, all the salespeople in my office. And I said, I know what the problem is. I think they all thought they were going to be fired. I said, we got to start being nice to each other. And they laughed. And I said, you said this. And it was funny, but they knew it was true. And so we started churning that around with putting process in place and people helping each other and rewarding people and recognizing for people who are doing the right thing. And by the way, when I say being nice, I'm not talking about being soft. I'm saying doing the right thing, showing up with that courage to do the right thing, to help somebody. And when they did that, it became transformative. We improved retention dramatically. That was the first thing we saw. People start quitting, and we grew retention about 18%. And then over that 6 months, we grew sales from 50% a plan to 120% a plan, just by doing those things and having that sense of connection and people going home. But I also knew when they were going home feeling happy, satisfied. They had a good time. A lot of people want to start going out after work and connecting. In fact, that became really pervasive. Instead of all the stress and fear, people started getting along and having a great time. And they all made much more money, which is they were happy about as well. And but this is what we see. People end up becoming sucked into this addiction for that fear. But have you ever seen somebody come into a perfectly fine meeting and they suck the oxygen right out of the room? Well, maybe somebody you know. I'm not saying it was you. But what we need to do is put that love back in the room. That oxygen is love. We have to put that back in the room. And well, how do we do that, Owen? well, actually I wrote a book about that called The Power of Love in Business. And I cite all kinds of data around this from Deloitte, PwC, all these great companies. But there is a process to building that sense of connection and trust. And I call it love. You may call it passion, you may call it something else. But there's a process you can do and put that in there. But to keep it simple, let's talk about putting oxygen in our conversations. That's a great way to fill that space between stimulus and response. When we have a conversation, I coach executives on this when we talk about executive presence. Take a moment when somebody's talking to you and actually physically breathe. Count to 4 before you respond. And while I'm doing this, you're thinking, wow, Owen's really listening to me. And he's not nodding my head and agreeing maybe, or just thinking. But it gives respect, it gives us presence in our conversation. It also oxygenates our system so we're able to think more clearly. But it gives that respect and it allows us to build that sense of community and connection and builds that relationship. Another thing we could do to help us breathe in that conversation is maybe recognize one person, something somebody did, just to call and highlight that positive thing that they were going through. Another thing is to also focus on something possibly negative, but give it the respect it needs and not more or less, and quantify it and then move on. Another area is to talk about some things we look to aspire to, because without vision we perish. But it's always good to know what we're looking to strive for. But let's face it, fear is everywhere. But it doesn't mean we have to live with that or deal with it or put up with it. We certainly don't want to be complacent with it. More importantly, we want to put oxygen, we want to put love back in that room. And so when we do that, we show up with more clarity. We build trust. And we have that courageous communication that helps us move forward at a very deliberate way with a very intentional way. So when you go into your next meeting, be the person to breathe. Bring the person to bring oxygen into the room. Remember, oxygen is love.